welcome to the debate. Imagine you're driving down the highway late at night, and suddenly that glowing red engine warning light flashes on your dashboard,
Ugh, the absolute worst feeling.
right? And you really only have two choices in that moment. You can pull over to the shoulder, pop the hood, and, do the hard work of diagnosing the underlying mechanical failure. Or you just ignore it and pray.
Basically. Or you can reach into your glove box, pull out a piece of opaque black electrical tape, and just stick it right over the light on the dashboard. Problem solved, right? The light is gone, the cabin is dark again, and you can just keep pressing the gas pedal.
Right, and you feel great about that decision right up until the engine completely seizes a few miles down the road and, well, leaves you stranded. I mean, we all inherently understand that masking a distress signal isn't the same thing as fixing the actual system. Exactly. It's common sense. But when we transition from automotive engineering to human biology, we suddenly embrace the black tape. We celebrate it, actually.
We really do.
Today, we are looking at a substance consumed daily by billions of people around the globe, and we're analyzing its true function in our lives. We're talking, of course, about caffeine. And the central question we are debating is this: is caffeine a strategic catalyst for human flourishing, or is it primarily a compensatory crutch that, merely masks our underlying biological deficits?
It is arguably the most universally accepted, culturally celebrated biological workaround in human history. And because it's so ubiquitous, we rarely stop to ask what it is actually doing to our internal machinery on a cellular level.
Which is why our discussion today is grounded in comprehensive source material analyzing caffeine's systemic effects on cognitive performance, physical vitality, and long-term neuroprotection. My position in this debate is that when dosed and timed precisely, caffeine acts as a potent biological amplifier that actively raises our baseline potential for deep work, physical output, and neurological resilience.
And I will argue that caffeine's purported enhancements are largely illusory, acting as a biological bandage whose benefits are inherently limited by tolerance, dependency, and the disruption of vital sleep architecture.
All right, let's lay our cards on the table. When I review the material, I don't view caffeine merely as a reactive survival mechanism for people who frankly just forgot to sleep. I see it as a targeted agency of arousal.
An agency of arousal. Okay.
Caffeine receptor antagonist. Now, it blocks the chemical that signals fatigue, yes, but it does so much more than just stave off sleepiness. It fundamentally alters task engagement.
By just making you artificially hyper.
No. By raising the baseline neural firing rate, caffeine literally lowers the perceived effort of complex tasks. It facilitates entry into flow states, those highly productive periods of deep work where output actually feels intrinsically rewarding rather than draining.
Right, but...
And just real quick, beyond sitting at a desk, it offers systemic benefits. The material outlines its role as a proven ergogenic aid in physical training alongside staggering long-term neuroprotective benefits. Like, we're talking a 30 to 40% lower risk of Parkinson's disease. To me, that is not a crutch. That is a compounding biological advantage.
I come at it from a different way. The very mechanism you are praising, blocking adenosine receptors, fundamentally defines caffeine as a temporary mask for fatigue, not a genuine source of energy. Let's actually look at how that mechanism works based on the text.
Sure.
Throughout the day, as your cells burn energy, they produce a byproduct called adenosine. Think of adenosine like water slowly filling up a bucket in your brain.
Okay, a bucket of water.
Right. As the bucket gets fuller, it binds to receptors that slow down neural activity, telling your body, hey, we've done a lot of work, it's time to rest. Caffeine doesn't empty the bucket. Its molecular structure is just similar enough to adenosine that it parks itself in those receptors, blocking the signal. It essentially freezes the water for a few hours.
It steals the parking spot so the fatigue signal can't dock.
Exactly. But the water is still filling the bucket in the background. Blocking that signal doesn't eliminate your biological need for rest, it just blinds you to it. We have to talk about caffeine debt.
Which happens when you abuse it, sure.
Well, heavy regular use leads to tolerance. Your brain realizes the receptors are blocked, so it simply grows more receptors. This means the daily boost people feel they are getting is very often just the alleviation of their own withdrawal symptoms. You are essentially borrowing tomorrow's energy to pay for today's output.
I think that's a bit of a grim view, but go on.
Well, when we rely on a substance that has a 5 to 6 hour half-life, we inevitably risk degrading our sleep architecture. Sleep is the actual, non-negotiable foundation of human flourishing. If a tool undermines the foundation, you cannot legitimately call it a pillar of health.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on how this tool is actually deployed by high performers. Let's look closely at cognitive optimization. The material outlines how caffeine can be integrated into minimalist productivity frameworks, things like monk mode.
Ah, monk mode, the internet's favorite buzzword.
Hey, it works. For those unfamiliar, monk mode is essentially carving out a period, say 2 to 4 hours, of total isolation for deep, uninterrupted work. No emails, no phone, just execution. When you pair a highly controlled dose of caffeine, specifically with the start of that session, you aren't just blindly stimulating the central nervous system, you are engineering a Pavlovian response.
But a Pavlovian response is precisely what worries me here. You're ringing a bell and waiting for a chemical reaction to force your brain to do the work?
But it's an intentional signal. Over time, the sensory experience of the caffeine, the taste, the physiological shift, it becomes a behavioral anchor. It signals the brain to shift from passive administrative thinking into high-focus execution.
Even if you're already exhausted.
It provides the sustained mental clarity required to resist the itch for dopamine-heavy digital distractions. Look, in a world completely characterized by fractured attention and endless notifications, intentionally using a molecular tool to anchor yourself into higher-order thinking isn't dependency. It is a profound demonstration of agency. You are taking control of your biology to achieve a specific aim.
Is it agency, though? I question the true sustainability of this artificial signaling over the long haul. If a central nervous system stimulant is absolutely required to trigger this monk mode, is the individual actually cultivating cognitive discipline?
I'd argue yes, because they are sitting down to do the work.
Or are they just developing a chemical dependency that happens to be disguised as a productivity hack? The material specifically notes that the very same substance that sharpens attention can completely fragment it if used compulsively to mask chronic sleep debt. Well, sure.
Anything abused is harmful.
But if your anchor requires constantly forcing your baseline neural firing rate up artificially, you're walking an incredibly thin line between a productive flow state and simple, chaotic hyperarousal.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. Think of caffeine like a tuning dial on a high-end stereo, rather than just an on-off switch.
Okay.
It lacks precision. The material explicitly details how we can calibrate this precision to avoid that hyper-aroused fragmentation you're talking about.
How so? Because for most people, that dial just goes to 11 and they end up jittery and anxious.
By creating strategic synergy. A prime example from the material is pairing caffeine with L-theanine, which is an amino acid naturally found in green tea. L-theanine works by increasing alpha brainwaves, the same brainwaves associated with meditation and relaxed alertness.
Right. It's often sold as a supplement stack.
Exactly. When you combine the two, L-theanine smooths out the rough edges of the caffeine spike. It promotes a calm, highly focused state rather than a frantic, heart-pounding energy. That proves we aren't just at the mercy of a blunt stimulant. We can actively modulate it to dial in exact cognitive states.
But even with L-theanine acting as a buffer, you are still fundamentally manipulating the brain's baseline accounting of fatigue, which brings up a glaring issue. That cognitive flow state you're praising, it burns massive amounts of energy. The brain is an absolute energy hog.
It is.
And that creates a perfect bridge to how caffeine affects our actual physical energy reserves, the body's physical vitality.
Yes, and the clinical backing for caffeine as an ergogenic aid in the physical realm is incredibly robust. It doesn't just make you, feel awake. It actively changes your physical machinery.
By forcing it into overdrive.
By optimizing it. The primary way it does this is by mobilizing free fatty acids from your fat tissues to use as fuel.
Let's explain what that actually means for the body during exertion.
Right. So normally, when you go for a long run or do an intense workout, your body prefers to burn the readily available sugar's glycogen stored in your muscles. When that glycogen runs out, you hit the wall. You're done.
We've all been there.
Yep. But caffeine actually tricks your physiological systems into opening up your fat stores earlier in the workout, burning those fatty acids first. It's essentially leaving your premium fuel, the glycogen, in the tank for when you really need it at the end of a race. Furthermore, it increases motor unit recruitment, meaning it literally forces your nervous system to activate more muscle fibers at once, giving you a measurable edge in strength and power output. It changes your physical work capacity.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. You are framing this physiological shift as if caffeine magically creates new capacity out of thin air.
I never said magic.
But you are simply forcing the engine to run hotter. Look at the cycles of sensitivity detailed in the source material. It explicitly states that to maintain these physical benefits, users must take a 1 to 2 day tolerance break every few weeks just to reset their adenosine receptors.
Right. Cycling is pretty normal.
If you have to periodically starve your body of a substance just to make it work again, it is absolute proof that the body naturally resists this forced output. The biological system recognizes it is being pushed past its baseline, and it adapts by dampening its sensitivity to protect itself.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because, well, cycling is a standard, universally accepted practice for virtually all biological optimization tools. We don't lift our heaviest weights every single day. We cycle training intensity through periodization so muscles can recover.
That's entirely different.
Is it? We cycle nutritional intake with things like intermittent fasting. Why should a pharmacological tool be held to a completely different standard?
Because periodization in training allows the body to naturally rebuild. Cycling caffeine is just managing an addiction, so the drug keeps hitting hard.
But the benefit of the drug hitting hard is what the material calls the effort hack. By reducing the perceived exertion during a grueling workout, by modulating dopamine to make the struggle feel intrinsically easier, caffeine increases your motivation and increases your drive to engage with difficult physical tasks.
At a cost.
But over months and years, that compounding behavioral consistency, actually showing up to train because it feels more manageable, yields massive, entirely natural physiological adaptations. The caffeine didn't build the muscle, the consistency did. Caffeine just opened the door.
But at what cost to the recovery side of the equation? You are mobilizing fatty acids and spiking adrenaline to push harder, which means you are inducing much deeper systemic stress. If you are constantly overriding the body's own perception of effort, you are far more likely to overreach, to injure yourself, or to dig a recovery hole you can't sleep your way out of.
Which brings us perfectly to the long-term biological data. Because if caffeine were merely borrowing from tomorrow, as you say, and digging unrecoverable holes, we would expect to see long-term degradation in habitual users. Their health should decline. But the material shows we see the exact opposite. Let's elevate this from daily productivity to long-term health span and neuroprotection.
I'm glad we're looking at the long-term data, but the context of that data really matters.
Let's look at the numbers first. The epidemiological evidence is staggering. Moderate habitual intake, which the major health bodies defined as up to 400 milligrams a day, or roughly 3 to 4 standard cups of coffee, is linked to a 30 to 40% lower risk of Parkinson's disease.
Yes, population-level studies.
It shows a significant reduction in Alzheimer's risk. It is associated with a lower incidence of type 2 diabetes. We are talking about the active promotion of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF. Think of BDNF like Miracle-Gro for your brain. It promotes the survival of existing neurons and encourages the growth of new ones. Caffeine consumption is linked to reduced neuroinflammation. This isn't just about feeling awake on a Tuesday. This is active biological resilience as the brain ages.
That's a compelling argument. But have you considered the profound individual variability that those broad population-level studies gloss over? The material specifically points to genetic factors that drastically change how this chemical interacts with the body, most notably the CYP1A2 enzyme.
Right. The primary liver enzyme responsible for metabolizing caffeine. I have to admit, when I first read the source material's deep dive on the CYP1AG gene, it completely changed how I view a mid-afternoon coffee.
It's a massive blind spot for most people. The reality is, a significant portion of the population carries a gene variant that makes them slow metabolizers. For these individuals, the liver produces less of this specific enzyme, so caffeine doesn't neatly clear out of their system in 5 or 6 hours like it does for a fast metabolizer.
No, it definitely doesn't.
It lingers for 10, 12, sometimes 14 hours. For them, it causes prolonged systemic stress, worsens baseline anxiety, and absolutely destroys their sleep architecture.
Which means that 2 p.m. espresso is still actively circulating in their bloodstream at midnight.
Exactly. And the damage there is insidious. The caffeine might not keep them from falling asleep. They might feel exhausted enough to pass out, but it prevents the brain from dropping into the deepest stages of slow-wave sleep.
Which is crucial.
That deep sleep is where true neurological recovery, cellular repair, and memory consolidation actually happen. So if a slow metabolizer is constantly blunting their deep sleep for the sake of daily output, they aren't achieving neuroprotection, they are accelerating cognitive decline. And furthermore, we have to disentangle the actual caffeine molecule from the delivery system.
Meaning the coffee bean itself.
Right. The material notes that many of these long-term health benefits you cited, like the reduced risk of liver conditions and metabolic diseases, likely stem from the massive amounts of antioxidants and bioactive polyphenols found in whole coffee beans and tea leaves. It is entirely possible, and even likely, that the caffeine molecule itself is just riding the coattails of these other protective compounds.
It's a very fair distinction regarding the polyphenols, which is why the source material emphasizes whole sources like tea and coffee as the optimal delivery systems, rather than synthetic energy drinks. But we shouldn't dismiss the stimulant itself. The neuroprotective mechanisms, specifically the promotion of BDNF and the complex modulation of dopamine and serotonin receptors, are tied directly to the stimulant properties of caffeine, not just the antioxidants.
But the genetic risk remains.
Yes, the genetic variability absolutely requires self-awareness. If you are a slow metabolizer, your strategic window is much shorter. You have to cut off intake earlier in the day. But a genetic variance doesn't negate the utility of the tool. It simply demands precision from the user. When treated with deep respect, strictly stopping intake 6 to 10 hours before bed, managing the dosage relative to your body weight, and intentionally incorporating those tolerance breaks to reset the adenosine receptors, caffeine moves from a mindless habit to a precision catalyst. It takes a solid, pre-existing foundation of health and amplifies it, aiding in deep work, maximizing physical vitality, and fostering long-term emotional and neurological resilience.
The operative word in everything you just said is if. If it is treated with respect. If you manage the dose. If you understand your genetics.
Well, of course.
But elevating caffeine to a pillar of human flourishing is inherently dangerous, precisely because its chemical nature actively invites dependency. The biological costs of that dependency, the genetic sensitivity you just acknowledged, the sleep disruption, and the constant daily threat of masking genuine exhaustion make it a highly volatile tool. We have to remember the core truth of the material. A stimulant can never, under any circumstances, act as a substitute for actual sleep, proper nutrition, or genuine intrinsic purpose. It is far too easy to use caffeine to borrow from tomorrow, and eventually, tomorrow always comes due.
On that point, we are in absolute alignment. The material is unequivocally clear. Caffeine can amplify a solid biological foundation, but it cannot replace a crumbling one. And I think there is one more vital point of convergence here, something that exists completely beyond the molecules, the adenosine receptors, and the liver enzymes, and that is the psychosocial dimension of this tool.
You're talking about the ritual aspect.
Precisely. Independent of the stimulant effect entirely, both the material and our lived experience point to the profound psychological value of the intentional break.
Oh, I agree completely. In an incredibly fast-paced, hyper-digital world where we are constantly expected to be on, the physical act of preparing a pot of tea or a pour-over coffee provides a necessary stoic transition. It is a rare moment of tactile stillness, waiting for water to boil, measuring the grounds. It forces a pause between deep work sessions. It physically pulls you away from the screen.
And culturally, it serves a unique purpose. It is one of the few universally accepted social lubricants we have that doesn't involve alcohol. Let's grab a coffee is the universal invitation for connection. Sharing a brew provides a low-stakes environment for mentorship, for vulnerability, for resolving conflicts, and for genuine human connection. Those psychosocial elements, the ritual and the relationship building, are undeniably beneficial to a thriving life.
They foster the exact kind of community and belonging that are just as vital to our long-term health as BDNF or glycogen sparing. You could drink decaf and still reap a massive percentage of those specific benefits.
So it seems we arrive at a deeply nuanced intersection. Balancing chemical enhancement with our fundamental biological baselines is a complex, highly personal calculus. It requires looking incredibly closely at our own habits, understanding our unique genetic predispositions, and above all, fiercely protecting our relationship with sleep to determine how the insights from this material truly apply to us.
Exactly. We can't just operate on autopilot. We have to constantly ask ourselves if we are actively driving the machine or if we're just blindly taping over the warning lights because we're too afraid to stop.
Which brings us right back to the dashboard. The next time you reach for that morning cup, take a brief moment to look at your own internal warning lights. Are you intentionally fueling up for a drive toward a specific purpose? Or are you just trying to hide the fact that the engine desperately needs rest? The choice ultimately is yours.